I'm no longer on the board or anything like that. Um, I just noticed, and so for the folks at home, there's always
Just
going to be
went live.
some little hiccups and things like that. I think we just went live, so I think maybe we missed the introduction. So at the risk of repeating myself, welcome Mico Yuck. She's a data evangelist. She's well known in the field with over a decade of experience at places like Looker, Logi Analytics, and Count. Uh, Mico runs a podcast and is at every conference and knows all of the different threads going on, not just in data visualization, but analytics and data engineering. Welcome, Mico.
Thank you, Elijah. Yeah, we had a fruitful conversation before. I think we should have
Yeah,
met earlier.
I think so. I think, well, I've seen you around and we've been involved in conversations. The funny thing about this series, it's allowed me to reconnect with people who I've worked with in the past or been in contact with in the past, but also get to know people that I've always wanted to get to know, like you. So
Awesome.
I'm really happy to have you here. I'd love for the folks at home, I'd love for you to give a little bit of a story about how you ended up where you are, where you came from and what kind of paths you've moved through. Because what we try to do here, what we've tried to do with this series is try to explain to people how to be successful in data visualization.
Yeah.
And that means a lot of different things, right? Like how I was successful in data visualization as a data visualization engineer and developing maybe libraries and tools, very different than someone else who maybe is killing it as an analyst or
Right.
yourself, right? Like the path that you've taken. So tell me a bit about yourself and tell the audience at home.
Okay. Definitely. And hopefully I won't talk too much about myself because I struggle with that. But first of all,
The
Elijah, just want to
entire
say
point of this interview, Mico, is for you
no,
to talk about
it's
yourself.
hard.
For
Okay.
people who don't know, I've spent the last 30 minutes trying to get Mico to talk more about herself and less about me or other people. So this is my challenge today. So tell
Yeah,
me
well,
about you.
podcast interviewer. Okay, but can I just say at least congrats on the launch of Notable? Because I did get the email. So can
Well,
I just put
thank
that out
you.
there?
This is true. Free advertising, I suppose. Notable has entered the public beta. So if you want to experience a modern notebook platform with a really cool no-code
Mm-hmm.
data visualization tool, which is what I've been working on at Notable primarily, go take a look at it. It's notable.io, notable with an E as in notebook, notable notebooks. Notable.io. And yeah, go take a look. Thank you, Mico, for that. Once again, you've got me talking about myself.
Okay. All right. So let me get started. So Elijah, as you know, I was joking about not aging us. Apparently it's not me
That's right.
alone.
That's right. Mico just got out of college and started her career yesterday, but
Right.
somehow has achieved these great heights.
We were joking about Uncle Mico, Uncle Elijah and Aunt Mico. So
That's right.
where I started is ironic, Elijah. So I went backwards. I actually
Yeah.
started out as a data scientist in my alma mater, university, creating T models. T models, regression models
Mhm.
in SAS mainframe, so we could report our GPA to Forbes. Okay, I was currently a data scientist, but that term didn't exist back then. So I was
Right.
called
Right.
a
Right.
senior research analyst.
Oh,
Basically,
interesting.
right, it didn't exist, but I was taking statistics PhD classes
Yeah.
at night and doing very well. So I actually started as a data scientist. Then I transformed and got over to something called BI, which I also had no idea what the hell that was, and
Mm-hmm.
got into what we call data visualization. So, quick story about this that I think everybody appreciates. So, obviously, coming from data science, right? You're sitting on building your models, and you're all about, testing and sampling. And admittedly, it wasn't that visual, right? The numbers that we
Yeah. Of
report
course.
within
Yeah.
Forbes for GPA, you have to just make sure you prove your models and people are happy.
Right.
What was
Right.
consistent that I learned between that and my data viz career, which I'll talk about in a minute, is that either way, people like to shoot the messenger. The message is not consistent, okay? And there's not a data viz person on the planet that has not experienced that, right?
That's right.
If
That's
you
right.
are the person that created it, right, Elijah, and it
That's
doesn't
right.
say what people want it to say, or they read something different, you become the target. So
That's right.
fast forward out of data science, I then get called in to do this Excel kind of Excelsius. This is where I'm aging myself. Excelsius data visualization role. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, being out of college, right? I was out of college a year. I remember telling them I didn't even know what Excel was. I remember them saying, "Can you come do this Excel thing?" I said, "Yeah, of course. I'm an engineer.
Of
Like
course.
that's
Right.
my major. Yeah, I can do it." They're like, "Can you build charts?" I'm like, Yeah, of course.
Of
I could.
course, of course. Right.
Right. Can you are you able to communicate your data? I'm like, yeah, of course. I'm an engineer. What do you mean I'm a computer engineer? No freaking clue, Elijah. Do you know
That's
what
good.
no clue
That's
is?
good.
I went off the call, right? And I said, oh my God, I gotta Google. Like I tell my family, I'm like, guys, do not call me. I'm on Google and I have to become a data viz something something with some Excel tool. So there I was in Google XCEL and phone Excel energy. And I'm like, oh God, I have to learn an energy company. How bad it was.
That's
Okay.
that's great.
Right. So I go, no, this can't be it. I can't learn a company tonight. So I start typing. I'm like, data viz chart. I come up with this thing called
I love the
EX.
idea that you searched for Excel
Yeah,
and the first thing
with
that
no
came up
E.
was not the spreadsheet. It was something else. That's
Right. And this is the night before, right? The work starts in the
yeah.
morning. So long story short, that night, I'm like, okay, you have to know enough to go in there because you don't know what a chart is, you don't know what Excel is.
Yeah.
Downloaded Microsoft Excel quickly, started grabbing some stuff and putting it on the screen. I'm like, oh, it's just numbers, but this is prettier.
All right.
Long story short, I literally, when they say, I think was it Malcolm Gladwell that said it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert? Am I
Oh yeah,
am I
yeah,
correct?
sure.
Listen, I did 10,000 hours within 3 years. So I
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
barred myself into my room, and that's where I became the data viz specialist. I was so excited about. So you guys will probably see I'm very colorful. My hair is usually purple or blue. I came from a background where I wanted to do art.
Hmm.
However, in the Caribbean, parents want to know how you're going to pay the bills.
That's right.
so,
That's right.
so when you say art, you might as well say stuff like I'm pregnant without a dad, I'm dead, I have a tattoo. All of it's the same thing in their ears, right? They just hear bad choices, bad outcomes. And so that, even though I had done art, that was out there. So, in the Caribbean being small, and Elijah, if you have any Caribbean friends, they tend to gear toward more engineering, which is
Sure. Sure. Of
encouraged.
course. Yeah.
So imagine my face when I went, wait a minute, there's a visual part to this. Like I could do visuals on computer and it not be graphic art. I'm from the Caribbean. There's 80,000 people on my feet in my island. And so I became
Right.
obsessed with this. Okay. And so that obsession led from me being the quote unquote data viz chick to being kind of the person that worked directly with the CIO of then Ryder Logistics.
Yeah.
At that point, on top of it, they were laying out, Six Sigma, right? Lean
Hmm.
Six Sigma, the GE. I
Yeah.
became the visual expert for entire.
Explain though. Explain for our audience what that is though.
Okay, what Six Sigma is. Okay, so Six Sigma is basically, without boring them, methodology that's focused on kind of leaning out processes. It's a Japanese type methodology, and GE, General Electric, is the one that really got it started. So it kind of has these taekwondo belts, white, green, black, etc., and they have these lean masters. Well, at that time, I was assigned to be the visualization expert for
Hmm.
one of the 20 lean black belt lean masters in the country. That was back then. So what I was doing was going through, because Ryder Logistics is basically the top outsourced supply chain logistics company in the world. I mean, in the US. So they deal with supply chain for all these companies, Walmart, Toys R Us. My goal was they were doing Six Sigma across these different warehouses, and I was supposed to be the visual end.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you've never been through warehouses in America, it ain't great. Okay. So I was literally I was given everything from like Excel to like chalkboards.
Oh
And I
wow.
was told, right, like this is what I'm saying. This job got interesting. Like it was Excel was very contained. It was, hey, we need to
Yeah.
look at these metrics, put this together. And my boss was great. He let me go in a hole in a corner, stay in my apartment, and just work and produce the goods and meet him in another state. We then started getting into these warehouses in the Northeast. And I never forgot this because I think it was Toys R Us in particular, which has a very weird situation going on with their supply chain for Christmas. And we would get into where, Elijah, they had these boards in the warehouses and they wanted to make them visual. And I remember looking at them and I'm like,
Oh sure. Sure. Right. Because it's like
right,
scheduling boards or some optimization
yes,
of something within. Sure.
optimization of something. And so they were like, hey, at every stop, we need to get this visual. These long numbers and all this stuff is not working. So I had been exposed at that point to doing all kinds of visuals, right? It
Well, it's
wasn't
funny
just
because
like,
nowadays people do these exercises, right? Of like
yeah,
thinking about physicalizing or using paper
that's right.
or and you do it sort of to I don't know, activate some caveman part of your brain that
Right.
says this is
Yes.
real. Let's talk about this. But you're literally dealing with
Yes.
the I mean, it's funny because, you know, you talk about dating ourselves. I can remember being younger and seeing a lot of things like that, right? Like these physical
Mm-hmm.
versions of what we would think of as Gantt charts, or
That's right.
of you know, big numbers and sales and things like that. And 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 these all inspired the products and the artifacts that we make now. Like
That we have today.
the
That's
dashboard comes
right.
from the idea of your car dashboard, right? Like,
That's
which is
exactly
telling
right.
you all you need to know about how your car is functioning. And I mean, it's so how
And
did that
every app.
go? Yeah,
Well, it was fascinating because the reason I brought that experience up is because the difference with that was I was basically told these visuals have to be for people that may not have an high school education.
right, right.
Right? Like I was brought in a room and said, "Hey, Mico, these stuff you've been doing for executives is great. I need you now to take this down to a different level." And I went, "Well, what level is that?" Like, what are we talking about? And they're like, "I need it to be like iPad easy." And I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh, what does that mean?" And so I had to go back through honestly a whole retraining in simplicity, right? And
very interesting.
that was hard.
But isn't, I mean, isn't the typical stereotype that we think of for executives being boil it down so they have, you
Right.
know, like
That's right.
simplicity. I almost feel like it's this sort of bimodal thing, that it's got to be super simple for leadership and super simple for folks who are very unfamiliar. You know, maybe their data literacy is rather low. Um,
Well, that's what I thought, but they
did
told
it
me
feel
that that
it didn't
was
feel the
too
same for you?
much.
Yeah. Okay.
No, well, remember, I'm going into this. I'm young and I'm going, oh,
Mhm.
I do this all the time.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
we spend hours and days dumbing this down. Let's just take what we have for the executives. Let's get some formats for these walls and let's go. And they pulled me in, and the thought process was interesting, which was like, I don't think what you're building will work. And I said, guys, it's single charts. Like if you
Mhm.
use a gauge or you use a freaking pie chart, keep the series low. If you use a gauge, it's binary. Let's just keep
Right.
simplicity. We don't have to get complicated. You can do a single bullet. So what I got to them, which was interesting and dear understand, I said, look, why don't we just stick to like single, like binary bullet charts where it's
Hmm.
just one or two meanings. So no
Yeah.
type of trend, to be honest, nothing simple. And that to them was considered to be simple. Is it kind of crazy?
Well, I mean, it is interesting. You know, there's been a little bit more of a discussion of this, and I think it's going to grow as we move forward. The idea, instead of optimizing data visualization for humanity, right, and like thinking of
Right.
this biological humanity. Oh, well, you've got this brain, and your
Right.
eyes, they work with lengths and they work with this and blah blah blah. So the best chart is a bar chart. Instead, situating it within a culture, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean a culture in the sense of Japanese or
Right. Heritage. I
Caribbean
got that.
or American,
Yeah. Yeah.
but rather, you know, data engineers speak to each other differently and expect
That's
different things.
right.
Warehouse managers are
That's
have
right.
certain expectations, like you're saying, um, and
Finance
familiarity.
people, very
Yeah,
specific charts. That's
yeah.
exactly correct.
And I don't see as much of that. I don't see it very good. You know, when we think about taxonomies and other sort of general purpose data visualization selection tools, like, and I'm not talking about like within the tools itself, like Tableau, but rather um,
Yeah.
in
Vertical.
teaching material,
That's right.
it all sort of assumes a very generic viewpoint
That's right.
of all human beings could use charts like these, and you should look at that instead of thinking about your particular audience. So talk to me about how you got to know them and sort of build a successful data visualization for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I want to come back to that when I'm done with this because I can tell you my journey into finance
Oh
and
yeah.
what that took. I could tell you my journey. Yeah, like I had the same. I actually built even analytics to embed into bank websites. So
Oh
just what
wow.
you're talking about right now, I had a theory and I said, you know what? Because I'm multicultural, right? So I started
Mm-hmm.
saying, is this a one size fits all thing? And I think that's where I got to be the
Right.
data viz queen, right? I started going in the avatars. Like, is a finance person gonna consume data the same way my warehouse manager is doing it? And
I
I
mean,
had these
think of how
questions.
absurd that even sounds, right? Like,
Right.
yeah,
It doesn't make sense. And
yeah.
so, okay, so this is going to be good. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so what I did with those guys is I took a completely kind of different route, and I had a lot of autonomy and freedom. The client was LG, so the Koreans
Hmm.
at that point,
Sure.
which was interesting. And I kind of said to them, hey, if you guys want me to work in these warehouses, I need to become a warehouse lady, because if I can't see what they're doing with this, I don't know where to go. You want this somehow warehouse high school level thing. So I actually spent time in the warehouse watching how they interacted with the
Oh
boards and
wow.
what they did.
Hmm.
And I was able to stand up and say, let's say you were there, I was able to say, hey, I'm just curious, Elijah, what do you see on the board? So they gave me
Right.
a lot of
Right.
freedom, and you would then interpret. And sometimes I'd be like, wait, that's what you see? And I go to someone and say, what do you see on the board?
Yeah.
So I did a lot of testing myself, and I realized a couple of things through that. One is, I remember I was young, so put it on. Everybody has a different interpretation. Like,
Yep.
I don't know. Some people saw bluebells, other people saw, purple bars. I don't know what was happening, but it was interesting. The
Hmm.
other thing that I learned is that when given the opportunity, especially with the managers who are supposed to kind of maintain and control this, I realized that data viz wise, a lot of people were comfortable with something called pie charts, which we all know that got assassinated. And the reason why is it was a circle, and you just had
Right.
to draw a pie, like a pizza line. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
very fascinating, right?
Everybody's eaten a pizza in their life, right? So,
That's right. And these
right.
the warehouse managers with no training were like, I don't really know how this works, but like I understand
Yeah.
this thing. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, that works. And then the other third epiphany that I had was just the understanding that like they were told dashboards were coming. God, it's a dashboard chick. These poor people. I don't, Elijah, I had to tell, I'm like, dude, what do you think's coming? Like, this is not some like monster takeover here. I had some of the warehouse guys that were like, I don't know the technology. They were scared for their jobs.
Yeah,
And
no, no, absolutely. I mean,
yeah, like,
this is so. So let me pause you there, because what's really interesting to me, and I think this is a core lesson that we don't hear enough, is this sense of empathy, right?
yeah,
Of you trying to put yourself in their shoes and understand what's going to be most effective for them. And what it keeps making me think about is accessibility. We're
yeah,
talking more and more about accessibility, and I appreciate that, but I think it's really constrained because it's looking at accessibility and it's kind of talking about um, people who maybe don't see as well as other people, whether
yeah,
it's color
colorblind,
blindness, right?
501. 501,
Right.
you know the 501.
Yeah. And so you have screen readers and you have
Yeah,
colorblind safe color palettes and things like that. But accessibility has this cultural context to it
I
also,
agree
where
100%.
you can't really understand what's effective for your audience unless you get to know them, unless
And
you
study them.
understand how
That's
they're
right.
effective. Right.
That's
So
right. And
how
again,
did you do that? How did like what do you think, and not just from, of course, a long time ago when you were young, but also for the since then, the lessons you've learned with sort of
sure.
growing that empathy, and really what are the best approaches that you've got for folks
So
listening?
I know that a lot of people may not have this opportunity, but you should at this stage because we're all about empathy and inclusion. But what I can give you another story that I think will help people who are new in the field. Because you have to understand this culture thing you're talking about became a rabbit hole for me. It was
Yeah,
like, why does Elijah see this and understand
go
this
for it.
chart and prefer it? And this person just completely ignore it. Like I went down this deep, deep rabbit hole because I love data visualization. So there's another
Hmm.
story I could give you where I worked in the Middle East. Okay. I worked for Qatar Gas, one of the largest LNG companies. All right. Now we were brought in there to roll out their BI implementation, and data visualization was a part of it. So let's get to analytics. One of the things we were rolling out was for operations. Okay, so I'm very heavy oil and gas. That's my dad and them are oil and gas. I was raised in oil and gas, so I've been going out. I worked with Shell, ConocoPhillips, etc. But here was different because I sat down and there were two things that came to me. I said, okay, we have the same tools, but this is a different culture.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I'm in the middle of the Middle East. That's number one,
yeah.
right? And so what I experienced with executives is they were very like, kind of more Western, like bring it on, bring the tools, let's do it. And then I said, well, who is consuming this? And they said, well,
Right.
they report to us, these are people. So what I did is I convinced the CEO of Qatar Gas, and he remembers this because it was fun, to take an executive room and give it to me. Because the executive room, the way it worked is we had a layer where you walk in, and there was a
Hmm.
slight layer with windows above, almost like a movie theater, because it was the
Okay.
audio room.
Sure. Sure.
And I said, why don't you guys sit in the audio room quietly? Give me these reporting guys one by one. I'm
Hmm.
gonna put a video. I'm gonna put a visual that we created three versions of the visuals, right? That's what I have my team do on the screen, and I'm simply gonna ask them, explain to me what you're reading. So we put, and this screen is huge. We're in the Middle East, so you know the toys are. I mean, the screen is ginormous, like 80 inches or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
crazy. So I sit there in the room. Imagine this, it's a big room. I sit there, and this guy actually can't see there in the audio room. This is a true story because it's dark. So he walks in, and I just introduce myself. I'm friendly, obviously. How are you? Da, da, da. And he says, "Yeah, someone told me that my boss told me that you wanted me to look at something." I said,
yeah,
"Yeah, sure." I said, "Hey, relax. By the way, this is not a test. Like, I'm from America. I'm Caribbean, and I'm just trying to understand." So he went,
sure.
"Okay." So I put a visual on the screen. And what was fascinating is we had three versions of this visual. We had one with only a chart,
Hmm.
one with a chart with some context, and we
Yep.
had one with a chart with a detail report. This guy stood up, he picked the one with the chart with context, and in 3 minutes, he read us, which was kind of long, but I think he was scared at first. In three
Hmm.
minutes, he was quiet, and then he simply read what it was. And he said, "I think A is doing B." And I looked at him and I said, "What do you think the other two are doing?" And he was confused. And so the reason I bring up that story is we did this to three people and we quickly figured out the same visual work. And it was the simplest visual that you could imagine. And that was
Hmm.
eye opening. But you have to understand, Elijah, I did this across the board. I
Well,
also
I mean, and
tested
the important here
colors.
is the important thing here is that what you're doing isn't just finding out what's going to be the most effective for the
Or
audience,
sexy.
but also you're bringing in the leadership. You're getting buy-in from the
Yeah,
leadership because they're seeing,
correct.
oh, this is actually where the rubber meets the road, right? What did you
But
what was the
Elijah, it was deeper than that. In the
Yeah.
Middle East, the simplicity of what we were presenting, people questioned our rates. And I kept bringing up that Steve Jobs quote because I read everything I could get on Steve Jobs, right?
Hmm.
Simplicity is hard, right? But in the Middle East,
Right,
it's like we paid good money. We're expecting, I don't know, Avatar,
right.
Mission Impossible type craziness. And
That's
I
right.
said
That's
to them,
right.
I said, "Guys, what we created here is so difficult. You would not
Right.
believe how far it is." And so that's why I had to prove it because when we looked at it, someone actually said, "We brought these guys all the way here for this." I said, "Hold
Yeah.
on now, hold on.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate this." So it's very interesting. Another thing that played in, which database people will appreciate, is he picked the chart with the country colors on it.
Oh wow.
Qatar is
Hmm.
maroon. So
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
went, instead of us just taking the generic rag
Sure.
colors, right? We went with country type
Sure.
flavors. So, we just learned a lot about communication. So I just encourage database people, like I've done this throughout my career, just take a minute to sit by people. They're very willing. Put the stuff in front of them, the people who have to own this, and say, "Tell me what you think." And you will probably learn everything you need to know about what you're doing. And then also be willing to not be disappointed if it's way simpler than a magician database trick that you had. So what are your
Right.
thoughts on this? Because this is real world experience.
That's no. I think that I mean it is the. I think all effective data visualization people have had this experience.
Yeah.
Um, I think that well, there's so many different threads to pick up from this, but the main one to me is understanding the effectiveness of a data visualization product
Right.
within for an audience. So oftentimes, right, portfolios are super important for data visualization people. I'm going to give
Yeah,
a
yeah.
workshop at ODSC West in a week, I guess, on
Sorry, I'm
building data
missing you.
visualization portfolios.
I
Shame on you.
Yeah,
Shame on you.
I was on stage with Chris
I thought you were at
Ward.
Air Free conference. Um, but what I see
Sorry,
with
I'm missing you.
portfolios, especially when you're interviewing folks, is that they sort of show the work and say, "Isn't this cool?"
Yes,
And what
yes,
happens there when you say it like that, then your implicit audience is other data visualization professionals.
that's right.
And what I always do when I'm interviewing people is I have to, and not interviewing like this, but I mean for jobs, right?
Yeah,
Is I have to
yeah.
say, well, sure, but who was the audience? What did the
Who are you
audience
building it?
get out of it? Because the audience
That's
isn't
right.
me. It's not other data visualization
That's
professionals on
exactly
Twitter.
right.
Some of our work, that is our audience, right? Sometimes you're trying to raise your profile
Inspire.
among the data
Yeah,
visualization communities.
the
You're trying to
fun stuff.
inspire, exactly. But for
Right,
a lot of it, I had this, I've told this story too many times, but the first project I did at Netflix was this amazing Sankey diagram of flow through the Netflix product.
right.
And it was super complex and sophisticated and really powerful. And I loved it. And I showed it off to people and they said, yeah, but like, what am I supposed to get out of this?
That's
And I said,
right.
I don't know. That's up to the people using it to get things out. I'm not an analyst. And what it led me to, after seeing how people used it and the friction that it caused, was ensuring, just like you're saying, that there's so much more context, that you understand, instead of
Yep.
what's the quote best way to visualize this.
That's
Really, it's
exactly right.
what's the best way to visualize this for the audience, for their goal. And you have to be able to demonstrate that within whatever mechanisms you have to communicate about jobs, like portfolios. You have to
Yes.
say, well, who was this for? And how did you know that it was effective? And how did you adjust it to make sure that it worked for that audience? Because if a person can't answer those questions, if
That's
they
right.
just think it's effective because, well, this research paper says this is the most effective kind of chart, or it's effective because it's super sophisticated, nobody's ever done something as cool as this, that's not the kind of effectiveness that helps actually move products forward and have impact.
I'm smiling, Elijah.
Why is that?
I mentioned to you that I was known as a data viz queen because I was around the world teaching data viz. And
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
always tell people who got in, because data, as you know, visuals get people excited. It hits a different
Oh,
part of the
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
brain. And I'd always tell them, listen, this is your first class. Don't move beyond these 4 charts.
Right. Right.
Don't
Right.
venture into this area. You're not,
Right.
you need to figure out how to make these simple 4 charts work. And I think there must have been a bar chart, just a big blind chart. I said, unless you can make these work in a few seconds, don't start going to and like things like radar charts. I'm like, please, it's like, you know what I mean? It's like a kid with a hammer. Like, just please stay away. It's chart abuse. I said, for this, I remember my students used to laugh. I said, for the sake of the community, for the sake of this culture, do not hit somebody over the head with a spider chart. You do not know what you're doing. And my students would laugh. I'm like, don't. So I'm laughing with you because, yeah, I used to give them boundaries until you graduate from this and you have
Right.
over 100 people who have found value. You
Right.
don't move on to these other charts. What are your thoughts on that? It's a little bit constricted, but you got to think
No,
about
no, I don't think it's. I think that I would frame it a little bit differently, because I think what we get worried about is that there's the 4 charts, and I think typically people think like the 4
right.
charts: the bar chart, the line chart, the scatter plot, and the pie chart. And people, you have people who say you don't need any other charts than that. I think that the thing that I've experienced is that fundamentally it's accurate, but really what it means is that in people's heads, they have a certain chart in mind when they think of a certain kind of data because of their
That's right.
experience with that data, and they've seen it as a bar chart. Like, this is a bar chart in their head. And so you have to, in building things for that audience, you have to give them what they're asking for. Otherwise, you break trust with them,
That's
right?
right.
If they think
That's
it's a bar
very
chart
true.
and you show them a radar plot, then they'll say,
Yes.
oh, well, this isn't the data. This isn't the data I
They don't
want to look at.
understand it.
Right.
That's right.
Well, and they're unfamiliar with it. But to go back to what you were saying earlier, you provide them context. And in providing context, you can push the boundaries a bit. You could
Yes.
have the main view be a line chart. And then if you really think that there's value in a radar plot, you could bring the radar plot as a contextual view. And
That's
what
right.
that does is it lets you test out whether they find value in it, but it also makes them more familiar with it. And so it grows their data
Comfortable.
visualization literacy, so that next time that might be the primary chart. And so as long as there's this virtuous cycle, as long as you have a vision for the future, and you don't just think, I can answer this question because the answer to this question is there are 4 charts that you can use, right? What we're describing in that case, it fits right into what you're talking about with teaching, is that when you talk to students, I was a graduate student, I loved lecturing, I loved teaching. And when you're a freshman, you have a lot more answers than when you're a senior, if you're doing it right. Because you can say, what's the answer to this? And say, oh, well, here's the answer. And you're like, that's right for a freshman. But really,
That's
once
right.
you're in graduate school, the answer is
Yeah.
more questions, right? The answer is longer, it's more sophisticated, and there's more questions. I want to jump in real quick about,
yeah, we have a good
bunch
chat.
of comments.
And by the way, one of my students is here. Hey, Carrie. I see her putting it on here.
There you
Design
go.
to lowest common denominator. That's something I tell my students. I'm like, you always design for the lowest denominator.
But keep in mind that it's also your responsibility to push that that
Right.
common denominator up. Raise that bar.
Correct.
About ways that you can raise that bar. You can make a bar chart and you can decorate that bar chart with annotations or other things that make it more than just the default bar chart that comes out of Excel. You can put things around it that might be a bit more challenging, but because they've got the bar chart, they've got their safety, they've got their place of safety, and then they can sort of grow into understanding other forms of data visualization.
Before you go to questions, I just want to say one thing to what you're saying, which is one of the big proponents I teach is to build trust initially, meet people where they are. And unfortunately, I tell them if that's an Excel sheet full of charts and a pivot table, head over there.
I say the same thing. I say the
It's a
same thing
hard
all
pill.
the time.
Right. People don't want to do it.
We built an analytical application, basically a fancy dashboard at Netflix, and it was to replace an initial report, and that initial report was this 45-page PDF of line charts, and it was just line chart after line chart, this performance of this algorithm in this region, blah blah blah. And so, of course, what we did was we created an interactive application that showed all of those line charts. And then we showed other things too. But if we didn't meet them where they were, then, like you said, we don't establish trust. What I say over and over again is you have to earn trust.
That's right.
But then you also have to spend trust. Once people trust you, you need to tell them, okay, you trust me, Mico, come with me into this more challenging view. And they might find value in it. And if they find value in it, it builds more trust. If they don't find value in it, then you got to go back to building up your trust again. But you have to, it's not like you can't be Scrooge McDuck. You can't just build trust and have this pile of trust. It's a tool for you to help grow your colleagues and your audience. And so make sure that you spend it. Does that make sense to you? Does that resonate?
Yeah, 100%. All I'm thinking about is social equity and not being married to any tool, being married to your end user's goals.
Exactly. So let's jump through some of these comments because there's a lot of
comments
here.
Hey guys, hello.
So Jarrett Harris, my first time listening to these, trying to transition into more data viz work. I got to check out the rest of these. And he loves seeing a person of color on here, and so do we. I think that when we talk about representation and equity, that's on all of us as a community to make sure that we do that. But let's talk about that, transitioning into more data viz work. What is it in your experience, Mico? First of all, why do you think people want to do that? Like, why do you think people are attracted to doing data visualization? Why is it sexy to them? And then how can they do more of that? How can they have a more active role in that in their professional life?
Sure. And Jarrett, thank you for the love. That's a really good question. And so Elijah, I know you can answer this as well. So I'm going to give my answer, and I also want to hear your answer because I always feel like, collective perspectives is where we win, diversity.
I'm interviewing you, Mico.
I know. I'm a podcaster. That's a thing. You know what I do? Like I interview people. I'm trying, Elijah. I'm trying. See, that's why you need to be on my podcast. See, now we have all these pent up questions. Okay. So first and foremost, what I tend to have found after training thousands of people in data viz is it's almost like people have a creative itch, Elijah. I don't know if you've seen this, right? They're kind of in tech, some of them, and they kind of like see this and they're like, this is the only era. And that's what happened to me. This is one era where I can draw, right? I can actually do some form of art. There's a lot of colors here. On top of it, you quickly notice that people are drawn to visualizations.
Yeah.
And so if you want to get closer to the business, you want to get closer to decision makers, let's be honest, visuals is a great way to go. Do you agree? I mean, you're a visual person.
So my trust story, my favorite trust story is we built this algorithm dashboard at Netflix. And we built out this whole thing, and it was really great, and we were really proud of it. And we built trust with the algo team, with the initial version of it. And then we said, hey, when we get into this new view that focuses in on some specific aspect, I want to use a connected scatter plot. And I know that connected scatter plots are weird, right? Like it's one of those weird charts. Exactly. That's
not my favorite at all.
Right. So, but I thought it was an effective view for this particular thing. And that look, something like that look, was the response I got from the head stakeholder. But he was like, hey, we trust you, so let's try it. And it proved to be super effective enough that somebody had to go talk to Reed Hastings and tell him and explain to him how to read it.
That's what I'm
So
saying.
it does. I mean, this
It
does
gets
happen. It
you.
does work, and like you said, it gets you
That's right.
influence and impact. And so, yeah, I can see that.
People find
The other
you.
one, that you're talking about is the creative itch, because I think for a
Yeah.
lot of folks who end up in tech, you know, the line in South Asia is like you have three possible career choices:
Yeah.
doctor, engineer, or shady businessman, right? And so
Yeah.
people don't necessarily, they didn't follow their dream in becoming the
Right.
profession they're in. And so in the back of their heads, they say, well, I want to express my creativity. I want to express that. So I think that those two, I think you really highlighted it, because those are the two reasons. One, there is something fulfilling about
Yes.
being creative in data visualization. It's such a new field. There's so much experimentation going on that
That's right.
people find joy in it. And then the other, I think you're absolutely right, is that it's very influential. It's very impactful. So
Yeah,
I
it
totally agree.
gets you pretty much, and if you become good at it, people will find you. I mean, I've had a lot of students become the go-to data
Yeah,
viz
yeah.
people. People don't even know what their titles are. They're like, hey, I'm an analyst, I'm a this, but no, I'm data viz Elijah, in the company.
That's
Like people will
absolutely.
right, they'll say it. They're like, hey, I heard your data visualizer. Can you help me? You're like, oh, okay, I'll go with it. Let me create a username on Twitter, right? So I
So
think
so
those
how
are
do
two.
so how do they do that? How do they transition into data visualization?
Sure.
What's your experience with your students in the current climate? Because back when we got started, all you had to do was be egotistical enough to think that you could
Do
just
it.
spend the night learning Excel, right? And then tomorrow you're a data
Yep.
visualization expert. 10 years ago, that worked. Nowadays,
No,
there's
it
much
didn't.
more
No.
structure to it. So what's going on
That's right.
nowadays when you talk to folks?
So there's a few avenues. First of all, unfortunately, I have to say, I think there's two different avenues, Elijah. So I'm gonna take it from two angles. I obviously came from enterprise and now I'm in startup. So in
Mm-hmm.
the enterprise world, I feel like there's a lot more structure in terms of tools, first of
Yep.
all. Okay.
Yep.
No matter how you want to do it in enterprise, they have every tool, but depending on which construct you're in, someone is handing you in these roles and saying Power BI is our tool or
That's right. That's right.
Notables our tool. So I think the first things first is just understanding what your playground is and what toys you have in the play chest. The second thing I think that's really important is then to hone your actual skill set. So what I typically recommend people do is go in and take an audit of what's there. If
Mm-hmm.
you're new in a company, especially, see who's building this stuff. Just get a feel like what's going
Right.
on both on the
Right.
inside of your team and both externally. What are users using today? Might see a lot of Excel on the user side, but take a look at it and then determine, okay, what's the level of skill set here? Who's a visual guru? I would do that. Like, who's the guy or girl that's doing all this stuff? And I'd
Yeah.
sit with them and talk to them. A lot of times I would hear stuff like, you know what? I just get stuck with this because I'm creative, but it's not what I do. I would hear this all the time. And so I remember I'd go, hey, I think I can do this. And so for me, I went a bit step further, Elijah, but from there, I kind of went deep into studying data visualization from
Yeah.
Ralph Chart to Stephen Few to Edward Tufte to books on just data visualization, even for websites. I said I particularly went down a rabbit hole because I was fascinated. And what I started doing was I started to say, okay, let's take a look at what we have first of all before I lay out the land, on something that's a blank canvas or blank screen. Can I improve something that's being used? So I always went for something I said, if this is being used by Elijah, he's our executive. If you were friendly, I'm like, hey, Elijah, if you don't mind, I think it could really make this work. So it fits a
Yeah.
few
Yeah.
audiences or whatever. And I would actually go after the improvement route initially to test my skills to build a champion within the company. Someone who went,
That
oh
makes
my
sense.
God, Mico,
Oh, that's
great.
let me interrupt you real quick there, because
Yes,
that is such important advice, is to
early.
find someone who is a
That's right.
champion, to
That's
find
right.
someone who really, understands and sees value in what you're
I
doing.
loved it.
Yeah. Because you
Loved
have
it.
to have that feedback. You have to have
That's
that
right.
engagement. Otherwise otherwise your engagement's only going to become between you and the tool,
And a
right? And
team,
you're going
and
to and you're
even
just going to
team.
be pushing yourself. Yeah.
You're right. So building up those champions was very early, and they're not hard to find. When you pull up visuals, I'm telling you, people just got
No,
they go
absolutely.
on. Your
Absolutely.
eyes glitter. You're like, oh wow, you're that person. They're like, oh yeah, bring the dashboard anytime. Like
Right.
show me what you got. They too are
Right.
excited.
Right.
So I try to build those champions early, so I have people that are referenceable to say, you know what, Mico took something I was working with. I know she's a bit newer. She's been here, and I actually really like what she did. Couple things come from that, and I've had this experience, my students have, which is one, sometimes they refer you to other people in the company. So they're like, you
Yep.
know what, I work with this other EVP. you have a visual you're struggling with, let me introduce you to dashboard Mico. Okay. Number two is you have something that you can use and show. So when you
Right.
go somewhere else and you say, hey, I just
That's
want to
right.
show you what I did for Elijah. I'm just getting started here, so I'm kind of new, but this is what we had before, this is what we have after. You have a use case. I think
Right.
the third thing as well is that, you can then take that, and I do stuff like create templates. I'm like, if you're okay with this, could I
Hmm.
kind of create templates so there are people who maybe can't work directly with me, but I could make it easier for them. And again, I'm very given and helpful. So I'm one of those people that says, hey, if you get a template, I'll put out there and say, hey, we put this out there for your use. If you need help, I will help you. So I always think like, I always tell people, I don't know how you feel, like in data viz, we're in the TLC hospitality industry. Like I
That's
always feel that way.
absolutely. You're always some kind of internal consultant too, right? Because if you're
Yeah,
really good at data viz, there's not enough work for you to do on a specialized team. You have to hop
that's right.
around because if you're
That's
really good
right.
at data viz, your skills are going to be used across an
The
organization.
board.
The
That's
thing
right.
that I hear you saying, which I think is really interesting because it goes back to the warehouse example, is that when you're talking about supporting people and building up champions, you're talking about like helping, say, downstream stakeholders, right, to build better products, and they're going to become your champions. But then you're also talking about building up templates and best practices so that
That's right.
your teammates, the other side of the organization is also getting this support from the work that you're doing. And I think that's
That's
really
exactly
exciting.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, spread the, I mean, again, I love what you said, and I want to make sure I emphasize that. As a data viz person, I always get nervous. I have some students that have got pigeonholed kind of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
into the data team or IT team, and they're like, but everybody pulls me. Sometimes as a data viz person, guys, you have to kind of go to your manager and say, hey, like, look, I want to be a little bit more cross. Like
Hmm.
people are pulling me from across the business. I feel like I'm vertical. I got pigeonholed into FP&A, or I got pigeonholed. I
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
like the variety. Is it possible that I could, like you said, become a data viz consultant on the team? And so I think a lot of people, because you start yourself going, hey, I'm doing all this extra work, but all my thing says is financial data viz help, like on the bottom.
Well, it's not just
So
that, but what you also run into is because people who do data visualization are going to have strong data skills.
that's
If
right.
somebody is to say, hey, we don't have any real data visualization work for you right now, so why don't you be a sort of second rate data engineer or a second rate data
Uh,
scientist or spend your
yeah,
time,
you get.
working on this database for us. Let me jump to some more questions because they just
Oh,
keep coming in and I just have to ask them.
yay!
Otherwise, we're never gonna.
Let me
I've
know.
got questions for you, but so from Art, how have you made your transition to count from your previous roles in companies, and what data viz BI skills do you find you use the most day to day now in your new role at Count?
Yeah, absolutely. So during COVID, and I was talking to Elijah about this, like everybody else, I had a bit of an epiphany. So as I mentioned, I was in oil and gas, and what happened during COVID? Nobody was driving, nobody was flying. So
Oh
I
yeah,
don't need to
yeah.
explain what happened to gas, right? Like, like literally think about it. We're like 90% oil and gas. The world just stopped. So very quickly, like within 6 months, we knew the world had changed, okay, in oil and gas. Long story short, I took a stop moment. I actually retired from the industry during COVID, and then
Hmm.
I said, you know what? I hoped that the world would open. I was wrong twice, right? For 2 years.
Right. We
But
were
everybody was
all
like,
wrong so many
right.
times.
Everybody's like, no, 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 June 2022, it's coming back. I'm like, okay. I actually said, you know what? I've been in enterprise for a long time and I don't mind it, but I want to get my hand on the pulse. I heard about modern data stack and all this different stuff. Elijah, your startup was on my radar, and along with a few
Hmm.
others, as you know. And I just wanted to be more in that segment because I had been following on the side what was happening with like Jasper notebooks and all these different notebooks in
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
industry.
Oh, the
And it
notebook
didn't.
space is
Right.
so fertile right
It's
now. Yeah.
fertile, right? But you know what I'm talking about. Pre-COVID, it was a little lukewarm. I mean, it
Hmm.
was coming,
Yeah.
right? It was kind of coming, but it hadn't baked. Power BI was becoming the king of the industry. So long story short, I personally decided toward the end of COVID, I wanted to join a startup, and that's where I found Count, right? Fairly new startup, 10 people. Elijah, how big is your startup? Like 10
We're
people
about
too?
30 now. Yeah.
You're 30. Okay, but I remember
Yeah.
when you guys were small. I've been tracking you guys for a while.
Oh
And
yeah,
so,
yeah. We've only been around for 2 years, so we've been very small. Yeah.
right, very small, right? And so I kind of looked at it and I said, you know what? Because I personally I had felt, and please, if you are an enterprise, do not take this personal. I'm not saying this is you. The fact that you're here shows that you are thinking outside the box. But if you're in these big enterprises, it sometimes feels like you're kind of dinosauring. Forgive
Yeah.
me for saying
Yeah.
that. Am I
Oh, it's the
okay? Like,
truth.
forgive me, forgive me. I know we have people in enterprise here, but I just felt like it wasn't moving fast enough. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it was a personal choice of like, hey, I want to get in the action, be at the pulse of it, meet
Yeah.
people like Elijah, stay in touch, let's talk about what's happening in you. And then I wanted to bring that to my audience, to be very frank with you. So for me, it was a personal choice. And that's why I went over to Count. Now, in Count, we have a whiteboard canvas with data. Okay, we used to
Mm-hmm.
have a notebook. I wasn't there for the notebook, which you know, Elijah. I'm there for our whiteboard, which we launch, and I use it for everything. We literally eat our own dog food. So I was responsible for a go to market launch, which happened 2 months ago. And we use the canvas end to end because we track every single data point in the canvas, along with even planning. I used to use Figma to do my planning, right? Like everybody else to
Mm-hmm.
some extent. And instead, I did it in Count with live data. So I feel like obviously, I'm now more in the planning, kind of almost marketing role in terms of go to
Yeah. Yeah.
market. But I have to communicate to my boss,
Yeah.
right? I'm just like you guys. Like I gotta show him. He's like, okay, what are we doing? What's happening with this product? Da 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 da. And I have to go in and say, here's what we have lead gen wise. Here's what we have this wise. So my skill sets are very widely used. It might be slightly different because it's me creating my own world to communicate to my boss. But to be honest, it actually feels harder than when I was a part of a data team and had to like create data vises. This is very
Yeah,
diverse.
no, of course, because I mean, the problem is so much more complex. Because when you're
Correct.
creating data visualization, you've got a data set and you've got an audience, and you can build
That's
personas.
right.
And even for actually, this leads me to another question because we've got a question about building for audiences. So Jarrett's asking. He's been asked for a Sankey chart, but the data doesn't represent that, and he's been having a
I
hard
saw
time trying to
that.
push back.
Poor
Like,
guy. Poor guy.
he's asking for alternatives. I don't think we can get into alternatives without like seeing the data. Of course, it does.
Right.
It depends. Are things connected? Is it really sort of a rate of fall off, which you see a lot with people using Sankey charts for that? So maybe it's more like a funnel diagram. So it's hard to imagine what alternatives are.
Figure out
But talk about that general uh,
how to work with them.
experience of
Yep.
being told, "Hey, Mico, I saw a network chart. Make a network chart for me, and here's the data, and the data really doesn't suit it." Like,
Doesn't
what
work.
do you do in those situations?
So this is gonna take a little bit of what we call kahunas in the Caribbean. You smile. He's like, Miko, not on here.
We call it the same thing everywhere, Mika. That word
Okay.
is
It's gonna take
global.
some kahunas. And so what you typically do, or what I would do in that case, is I would actually give them what there's two ways you could go with this. I would create what they're asking down to the T to the best of my ability. I would then give it to them and pull them in a room.
Hmm.
However, I wouldn't pull them in a room alone. I would then go to a few other people and ask them who are relevant to this audience and say, what do you
Right,
see?
right,
They're probably going to be confused, okay, to some extent. And I would bring those people with me and I would say, hey, I built what you were looking for. I created a few alternatives and I know you like this, but I just wanted to share with you that like, Jarrett and Carrie, I brought them over because I know you work with them and they have to use this. And I spoke to them. I just wanted you to get their perspective. So I never tell people no. I never want to be the voice. I'm only just a
right,
data viz person. Okay.
right.
I get allies and I get people, I get their own peers to
Well,
explain
you
to
have this.
them.
It's funny because, and I want to emphasize this for the audience because what you're describing here, and I know you know this, but I want to say it very, very clearly, is that sort of relentless focus on audience and that empathy that you have
Yeah,
doesn't mean that you're always acceding to every request. It just
exactly.
means when you're
How you
saying
get
no,
around.
you're saying it in a way that remembers the audience and uses that empathy.
Correct.
So
And,
yeah,
and
I think
respects them, right? I respect
that's
them as
right.
an expert.
Exactly. Yeah.
Correct. And what I would tell them is I just did this because when I was trying to build it and I discovered that, Cam and Carrie weren't as clear. And so at that point, I would let them express what they see. They talk as pairs. And I say, by the way, I took the liberty of creating some alternatives, which Cam is, by the way, one of my students. I have some students on here. Hey, Cam, which he happened to like. And so maybe you guys should discuss this and come up with a consensus. Now, the trick about this is you need to have three, so you have a tiebreaker.
That's
Okay,
right.
so there's
That's right.
stick to odd number. There's some little logistics here, but you get my point. My point is that you have to generate a conversation that respects people's roles, gives them what they ask for, and then present alternatives, not just in the solution, but alternative opinions of people that they respect. Because at the end of the day, remember, we're just the messenger. We're not the SME, we're not the specialist. So that's what I would do. It's a little bit of work, but believe me when I tell you, it builds trust.
Absolutely. No, I think that's spectacular advice. And what I love about that is the structure of it. I mean, you're very
Yeah,
clearly you've been thinking about this for years, because
I've done it.
that's absolutely right. I mean, building trust, which I've been banging that drum for a while, but also, like you said, respects your audience, respects their
Yeah,
expertise and their time. You have to understand that when somebody says they want a Sankey diagram, that there's a whole narrative in their head behind that, right? They're not just
that's right.
walking in trying to make your life difficult. They
That's right.
think that there's
It's right.
something about this that is
Yep.
better expressed in a Sankey diagram. And how can you understand? Typically, when we talk about Sankey diagrams, flow diagrams, network diagrams, it's about connection and it's about causation.
That's
And so
right.
trying to say, well, what is
What
it
they're
that you
trying to
think
get to.
isn't being expressed in, say, like the traditional view of this? Let's say it's a line chart. And you're probably going to find out that they're saying, oh, well, this just makes it seem like it's just being reported, when
That's right.
really this factor influences this factor,
It's
and that's not being
important.
emphasized here. And then you can say,
I want to
oh,
show
okay,
it.
we
Yeah,
can put that factor in there, maybe not with a Sankey diagram, maybe we do that with an annotation on the line chart or
that's
something else.
right.
But that allows you to, you have to respect your audience. You have to
Yes.
understand that we're all working in collaboration together to grow together. And that's going to make the most successful people. It's not a
I
matter of being technically skilled or
thank you for saying that.
Machiavellian and political. Really,
That's
the
right.
way to success is making the people around you more successful and understanding
Zig
why they want
Ziglar.
something, yeah, that you think is
Right.
not the right choice, right? Like, so Mico, I mean, talking to you, I really enjoy this. I can't believe we're almost out of time already. And
I know.
but
I looked at
there,
the time. I'm like, oh my
I
gosh.
can't
Okay.
believe it. But it's so information dense. I'm so happy with it. I want to ask you though, um, for the most part, to get back to Jared's point, right? Like seeing a
Yeah.
person of color on here. You know, we were talking earlier in the prep about sort of thought leadership in data visualization, and thought leadership in data visualization is pretty monolithic. You know,
Yeah.
I'm yet another, white guy who's got some level of success in data visualization and have talked about that.
Hold on.
And when you talk about
Google's
Tufte and
important though,
Stephen Pugh,
Elijah. Not
hmm?
everybody knows your background. Google. Not everybody knows your real your background. Let's not underplay that now.
Well, it's it's
Because you
it's
talk about
non-traditional
Netflix, but
background.
you skip some stuff.
That's true. There's some, it did not, right. I don't have the typical sort of statistics
Correct. Mm-hmm.
or software engineering background, and I think that does give me a little bit more of a perspective. But fundamentally, we have a field that's dominated by
Right, dudes.
dudes, and you
Sausage
know
party.
one of the people that we were talking about was Stephen Pugh, right? Which both of
Yeah.
us were talking about how much we liked what
Love
Stephen
him.
Pugh's message
His
was.
yeah,
But then
his
Stephen,
thoughts.
and you hear the same thing about Tufte, of course, too, was
Yeah.
rather sort of antagonistic in his behavior. And so I wonder, why do you think why do you think the field developed like that? Why do you think that we do have some um, prickly, strongly opinionated, and somewhat
It's kind of
antagonistic
up.
people, you know,
So
in thought leadership? Like how do you? I mean, this is a challenging topic, of course, but like I think it's one that we should address, because you're clearly an expert, Mico,
thank
and
you, Elijah. I love this
um,
field.
I don't. I want to know what we do as a field to transition toward newer voices that are a bit more dynamic, that
Yeah.
offer up a view of doing data visualization that's not just about sort of this um, effective charts for cognitive, blah blah blah. That's very sort of old fashioned. That's something that's like you said, more audience focused, more empathetic,
Yeah.
more culturally aware of the different cultures that exist within data companies and all of that. Like, why do you think we are where we're at, and how do we get to
I think
how do
it's
we grow?
so this is a really good question. And I know that we have a limited time, so I think I'm gonna hit this on the head pretty hard.
Good.
I think there's a little bit of elitist stuff going on. I'll be honest with you, right? I'm from the Caribbean. Obviously, I have a passion. I've probably read every data viz book that's out there. Went to countries to meet data viz people. I was that crazy about this. And what I encountered when I came in was like, hey, I'm the author. I wrote this book, and I was actually be very rude to. And mind you, I'm like a fangirl, like I was just like, oh my God, I love your book. I read everything. I read it 4 times. I give it to people all the time. So when I get
Yeah.
hit with kind of like this rudeness, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, and I told you this offline that I don't think it was racism. This person is very rude.
Yeah.
I was just like very like, whoa, this is bad. And so, on one end for me personally, it's what fueled me kind of creating my own bubble and community. I'm just gonna be
That's right.
100%
That's right.
because
Yeah.
no one accepted me. Right. I was just this
Yeah.
crazy database girl. I hadn't written a book. I was in these corners around the world teaching database to all these people, but I wasn't quote unquote on the trail known. And I looked like a
Right.
16-year. Does that make sense? I didn't look the part. I didn't have any offers for book deals back then. And so I think part of it is just the fact that like there's been this like elitist of kind of like, well, where did you build database? And I'm not knocking you, Elijah, but it's like, oh, I went to Google. So they assume that like you know everything about database. You
Yeah. Yeah.
must
Totally.
experience it. And don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of great in that, but I do think in the world that we live in, we have content creators like crazy online these days, right? Where we are just creators. We have to read numbers to drive our business. Okay,
Right.
anybody who runs the
Right.
community knows it. We're artists in a sense. And I just think that like the face of the creator is changing, not just in color or just in gender, but just overall, right? Our generation is changing, right? Like this
The
obsession I've had
tools
with
are changing. The possibilities
tools
are
are
changing.
changing.
The expectations of the audience are
That's
changing. Absolutely.
correct.
Yeah.
What they want is change. So I just think it'd be good to see the field evolve like that, and it'd be good to see more people embrace the change. I don't want to go into it, but I definitely have people that came in there like, I'm just kind of here dwindling, and I don't look like the person that they think will be able to
Right.
do this because I don't
Right.
have this degree and this is that. And I tell them, I said, hey, remember, especially if you're a girl, 2 out of 5 bullets. If it's a dude, he's going after it. I've told women, as I said, go and get it. No excuses right now. So I just think that like the face of it has to change. We need good examples of what the change looks like. And I think we need people with awareness of like, hey, these are content creators too. We have content creators in the database space. I no longer call them database experts. They're content creators, like what we have on TikTok
Hmm.
and YouTube
Sure.
in
Sure.
the space. Do you agree? That's
Oh,
more
absolutely.
expanded.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're content
Absolutely.
creators, right? We've been around for a while. It's just that our tool and our choice is database, but we're content creators like you have on
Well,
TikTok.
I'd go even a step further. That if DataViz was easier to make, I think DataViz
Right.
would dominate things like
Agreed.
TikTok and dominate Twitter. If you could quickly put
Amen.
together an infographic, it would it would beat the pants off of any meme. It would beat the
Agreed.
pants off of anybody doing a quick change of their outfit. If you could really do the kinds of things that take so much time and so much expertise. So yeah,
Right.
I completely, and I think we're headed there. I think, frankly, that's the next growth phase for content creation is
And
around
Elijah, there's some
infographics and
authors
data visualization.
who I won't mention that are well known that have been very unkind to me. And I only chose not to defame them because I know the cost of race war, which I'm not interested in, but you'd be
No,
very
no,
surprised.
absolutely, yeah. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in calling out
But
individual
I understand what you're
people,
saying,
but
which is
but
like
I
there
want to
needs to
talk about the
be,
field because the field is like there is this moment
yeah.
that I think we're in where we need new voices, and not new voices just for the sake of it, and not new voices frankly for the sake of representation, though I think that's important.
Thank you. That's what
I
I'm
think
saying.
really it's the field itself has changed enough that we can't keep relying on the old
Thank
patterns.
you.
And we're data
Thank you.
visualization people, we're all about patterns, right? So
That's right.
we should do some data visualization. But Mico, we are out of time. This has been just wonderful, just a great conversation.
You guys are awesome.
I've taken a bunch of notes. I'm going to have to do a bunch of research. I'm going to spend all night learning Excel, and
Well,
I
we're getting
appreciate
you
you
on
taking the
Analytics
time.
on Fire. I'm going to plug that. We're getting you on my podcast, Analytics on Fire. We're going to talk a little bit about Notable and who's that for and
I
what's it
can't
for.
wait. I can't wait. It'll be great. Follow Mico on LinkedIn. Listen to her podcast. She's spectacular,
Thank
as you
you.
well know. Thank you so much, Mico. This has been just a spectacular conversation, and I appreciate getting to know you, hearing your story,
Thanks,
and
Elijah.
talking about all of these different things going on in data visualization.
And join DVS. If you guys have just linked on YouTube and you haven't, DVS is awesome. I think you're 150,000 members, right? It's on
No, it's not
fire.
100. Oh yeah, on LinkedIn there's 150,000 followers, and I think there's around 20,000 members. And yeah, Data Visualization Society is great. They're hosting the Information is Beautiful Awards, and have a bunch of
And
other
I
initiatives,
have the
including
Nightingale
this.
magazine. I
And
just
the
gave away
Nightingale
3 in the
magazine. There's
magazine.
so much stuff we can't even express all the things that DVS is doing. And of course, DVS is always happy to sponsor and support new initiatives. So if
That's
you
correct.
have ideas for things to do for the field, for the community, for the profession, then yeah, definitely swing by DVS and pitch your ideas. Thank you, Mico.
Thank
Just
you.
wonderful. I hope you enjoy the success
This
you
is
deserve.
amazing. Amazing. Thank you guys. Thank you for having me, Elijah.
Thank you.